Hello and welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm Jassim Azzawi. First, it was the American Iraq Study Group, and now the British have their own Iraq Commission. For months, President Bush ignored the Baker-Hamilton recommendations, only to start cherry-picking them when the search proved inconclusive. Will Gordon Brown do the same, or listen to this expert advice? Channel 4, a UK broadcaster in collaboration with the Foreign Policy Centre, took on the daunting task of looking for a successful exit strategy out of Iraq. They talked to experts, politicians and decision makers. Here are some of their comments, courtesy of Channel 4.
This is surely the most challenging question faced by the present government and the new Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, and indeed the other political parties. The situation already is very grave, but the stakes for the future really couldn't be much higher. And if we get it wrong, the consequences could be really disastrous.
Militias and armed gangs operating outside the law have been destabilizing the situation.
One of the most serious problems today we have is the sort of sectarian and religious and ethnic divide that's ripping the country apart, really.
Around Baghdad, up to 90% of the children are not attending schools.
I think a sudden and let's say, untimely withdrawal from Iraq would send completely the wrong message to Al-Qaeda, to other terrorist organizations. It would be seen as weakness and defeat.
There should be a planned pullout within a certain specified period of time.
So our problem was really to come up with a realistic solution that would not only suit our strategic interests, but also take note of some of our domestic concerns and, of course, most important, what's best for Iraq itself.
I'm an optimist by analytical training and by disposition, but Iraq from 2003 onwards has robbed me of the capacity for optimism.
We thought we were going to achieve something good. That has not happened. It's actually time for a change.
I don't think the situation in Iraq now is worth the life of another single further British or American serviceman.
To examine some of the recommendations and relative value of this Commission report, I'm joined by two of the 9 commissioners, Lord David Hannay, former British UN envoy, and Dr. Rosemary Hollis, Director of Research at Chatham House. Lord Hannay, that very last statement, that soundbite from Christopher Meyer, sounded a little bit harsh, almost callous.
Well, it wasn't the view taken by the Commission. The view taken by the Commission was that Britain, for better or for worse, joined the coalition that invaded Iraq in 2003 and thereby accepted certain responsibilities, both under international law and politically, and that it needed to see those through. And we then put forward a number of recommendations for reducing the military presence in Iraq, for trying to increase the regional solidarity of Iraq's neighbours, for trying to bring about within Iraq some reconciliation of the different points of view, for strengthening the humanitarian input, but we did not propose the withdrawal of British troops, and we did not propose the setting of a timetable for that.
But to what extent that kind of deliberation and that kind of perhaps prevailing sentiment somehow, one way or another, made it a collective thinking that it is time to leave, regardless?
Well, I think we're all very well aware that the end state of Iraq has to be a country independent, sovereign, and without foreign troops on its soil. That is the end state which we would all wish to see brought about. How can that be done without the situation descending into chaos? How can that be done within a time scale that is not infinite? That is what we were trying to grapple with.
One of the recommendations, Dr. Rosemary, that perhaps is a little different than the the previous policy by Prime Minister Blair, when he said, you know, we will leave, or at least we will have a major drawdown when the conditions are right. Right now, the Commission's recommendation is different.
That's absolutely correct. One of the main recommendations of the Commission was rethink the objective and be more realistic. That once upon a time, the hopes for Iraq were that it be a free, independent, democratic,
that's all gone,
peaceful state. Now we're talking realistically, what's the best we can hope for? And as the Commission members recognized in their report, there are no ideal solutions left. the only options are all painful. And so what's the least bad of the options, and what's the most that the British can realistically expect to do in recognition of their obligations, having embarked on this in the first place?
Somehow, one way or another, you are banking on the Iraqi army to be fully trained, whether by the Americans or by the British, in order to take over its responsibility. But that's a long way coming, isn't it? I mean, so far, it has been a meager success story. The Americans, they have spent $19 billion on the Iraqi army in the north and the center. And so far, they say only perhaps 1 or 2 divisions, they have the capacity to initiate actions on their own.
Well, it was certainly made much worse by disbanding the existing Iraqi army, and that was a blunder which I think everyone now recognizes was
Can you resuscitate it?
Unforced blunder. Well, you can't reconstitute the old Iraqi army, no, because there is a new Iraqi army that now exists and is being trained. But yeah, you're quite right. You are quite right. It cannot be done with a wave of a wand, and what we said was that the British who are going to be there for the next period should be concentrating above all on the work they are doing with the Iraqi army to strengthen its capability to take these things on their own, and should not be getting involved in direct military operations which they initiate, the British initiate.
Dr. Rosemary, in the report, there is a very grave statement that is somehow the insurgents or / the militias, they have the capacity to affect the British withdrawal or not. They can dictate whether to go underground or overground, to say whether conditions yes or no. So you want to take away that capacity from them?
No, we don't actually say that they have the capacity to go underground or overground. What we say is that at the moment the decision to leave is dependent upon conditions in Iraq. And we say refocus and decide to leave when the British Armed Forces have done as much as they possibly can to train the Iraqis, and that they have dispensed that task and there's no more that they realistically can do. Do not make it dependent on the situation on the ground, otherwise you get into a vicious cycle where you are claiming that you're not going to go until the attacks stop, and since most of the attacks in the south are on the British forces, it is fairly ludicrous to say that by staying you're going to stop them.
Somehow that suits the Iraqi government, doesn't it?
I don't think the Iraqi government is necessarily interested in what the British are doing on the ground in Basra.
No, I meant in the sense that they want them to stay as long as possible.
Well, they are not committing on that, and I don't think politically it's feasible for them to say precisely that they want them to stay as long as possible. They say don't go yet, is what they say. And what the Commission is recommending is that with respect to the British forces, I mean, it's recommending a great deal more in terms of regional diplomacy and to the humanitarian situation. But with respect to the British forces, that the British presence has to be dependent on completing a task which the British themselves will know when they've finished.
Lord Haney, take me through the potential scenario. For instance, once this government decides it's time to leave, what will happen? Will they hand over the bases and the environs under their control to the Americans, or have a phased withdrawal and just bring their ships and leave? How does it work out?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a member of this government, and nor am I a military man, so I'm not able to answer that with any precision.
More feasible hand it over to the Americans?
Of course, the British position in the south is likely to clarify in the reasonably near future into holding on only to one major base area around Basra airport, and with the withdrawal from the centre of Basra. And there will then be certain activities which they will conduct also in Baghdad with the Americans, which they're involved in already, and a certain amount of line of communications stuff, but mainly it will be the base near Basra. Well, the decision on that will be taken by the government in due course, but we have merely made the recommendation that the determining feature of taking that decision should be when they believe that our work there in training the Iraqi armed forces has got as far as it can be taken.
In the recommendations, that it says the Gordon Brown government should have the capacity to work at variance with the US. What does that mean, really? You know, we are leaving regardless what the Americans think?
I think we're simply recognising that the British Prime Minister has to make a decision about the British armed forces and what they can realistically do in the circumstance, and then hope to harmonise that with the American plans and certainly do it in consultation, but that his position should not be driven by what Washington is doing first and foremost.
Dr. Rosemary Hollis, thank you very much. We'll take a short break now, and when we come back, we will continue our discussions with Lord Haney and Dr. Rosemary Hollis. Stay with us.
This is the beginning of an historic debate about the future of Iraq, the future security in the Middle East, and about Britain's role in the world. Stephen Twigg, Director of the Foreign Policy Centre.